When we imagine ourselves on the Leadville course, we see ourselves pedaling those 105 miles out of town, up Keevens, over the top of Sugarloaf, across Pipeline, and so on. We even did a whole episode on pedaling, Fatty, but the image that is harder to imagine is when we get off our bikes and we are walking.
Yeah, we don't like to spend all that much time thinking about it, but we should, because walking is an important part of the day out on the Leadville course. I don't think it warrants a full episode, but we have talked and we will continue to talk about when and where most of us are going to swing a leg over and start hiking that bike. Most notably, the Goat Trail and then the bottom of Powerline inbound.
And these sections are so crucial that we would advise listeners to consider them when choosing your mountain bike shoes for Leadville. Here's my suggestion. Go for a pair of Shimano's more flexible shoes. I like the XC5s. They have more flex in the sole to make those conga lines more bearable.
Yeah, that is a great idea, especially for someone who is new to Leadville or is expecting to have some of those longer hike-a-bikes as part of their day. I wear the S-Fire race shoes, but a shoe that stiff is not for everyone. So try something that has a little more give. Your toes will thank you.
And you can make up for that flex in the shoes by pairing those XC5s or some other shoe with Shimano's XTR or XT trail pedals. That model has a larger platform, so the shoe won't flex as much once you are clipped in. If this setup sounds good to you, check it out at bike.shimano.com, and thanks Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2,
1. Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. It is Season 7, Episode 8 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, haunted most.
And I'm Eldon Nelson, but for about 20 years now, I've been known as Fatty. It's kind of amazing to think that my old fatcyclist.com blog is closing in, Hottie, on its 20-year anniversary.
Well, happy anniversary, Fat Cyclist. You know, Fatty, between this show, the old Red Kite Prayer Pace Line, and the Marginal Gains podcast, you and I have recorded right around 350 episodes together, all about something as theoretical as biking.
Yeah, something simple that you would not really expect to be worth 350 hours of conversation. And yet, here we are. We're still talking.
And here comes Eldon Nelson. With 14 minutes to spare on that clock, the bragging rights and the heavy hardware. That's all you. Welcome back to your Leadville family and your finish line.
Fatty's finishing tips. With 25 finishes, he must have a few things he can share on how to get back to 6 in Harrison, or am I wrong about that, Fatty?
I have so many tips in the hopper, but I'm actually going to preempt the Fatty's finishing tips this episode because of an interesting article that came out on the front page of the April 4th, 2024 issue of the Herald Democrat, that is Leadville's hometown paper. Shout out to Casey Delzell for posting a screen grab of this story on the Leadville 100 Facebook page. The headline of that cover story is Leadville Race Series announces changes. Very eye-catching.
Right. The story behind that headline really comes down to a few key changes for the Leadville 100 mountain bike race, as well as changes to the run.
Yeah, we've been talking with folks at Lifetime for a few weeks about some of these changes, but we've held off talking about them on this show because a lot of those changes, as far as we know, are not finalized.
The Herald Democrat went forward with the story. However, the reporting in the story can be a little confusing. They seem to mix up changes to the run with changes to the ride.
Yeah, so we have, of course, invited and are looking forward to talking with Tamara Genlink on the show to talk about the race changes in detail. But in the meantime, we want to just briefly parse the story itself and see if we can identify the parts that matter to Leadville 100 mountain bike racers.
Yeah, I think that just to simplify this as much as possible, we mostly leave the run-based changes out of our discussion here. The first topic in the story is crewing changes at Twin Lakes Dam. Now, the Democrat says crew members will no longer be allowed to drive to Twin Lakes Dam. Instead, according to the story, there will be shuttles from the outward bound parking area to Twin Lakes Dam.
Yeah, but a lot of folks aren't even going to know what outward bound even means here. And there's no reason that you necessarily should as a racer. We've never mentioned it on this show. That's because it is not part of the Leadville 100 mountain bike race. It is, however, of course, familiar to Leadville 100 runners because it is essentially a big empty field near the fish hatchery, and it's used as an aid station in the Leadville 100 run.
With the change described in the story, crews, and there are a maximum of 4 crew people per racer, would need to drive to this field near the fish hatchery, park, and then take a shuttle to Twin Lakes Dam. Obviously, this is going to mean crews are going to need to get up earlier in the morning to beat their racers to Twin Lakes Dam.
Yeah, it also means from the logistics side that there are going to need to be a lot of shuttles moving people from that field to Twin Lakes Dam and then be ready to shuttle them back to Pipeline afterward. Hadi, while I picture this in my head and think about racers heading, from the starting line to Twin Lakes Dam, getting there, some of them in under 3 hours, well under 3 hours. I think that it's hard for me to envision anyway a crew could be confident that they are going to get back from Twin Lake Dam to Pipeline before their racers get there. With this change, I really do think that a split crew kind of moves from the nice to have category into the must-have category.
Right, and certainly hanging around at the start line and watching your racer go off and then trying to get down and catch a shuttle at Outward Bound, getting out to Twin Lakes Dam, that becomes a real nightmare for folks, too, who want to kind of do everything for their racers. So, yeah, going to be some new things here if this plan does come to fruition for racers and their crews to consider. The story then says, quote, there will be no limit on crew numbers at the Outward Bound or Pipeline alternate stations. And Fatty, we've got to do some creative interpreting here because there's currently no such place as Pipeline alternate.
No, there isn't. There's Pipeline, there's Twin Lake Dam, and there's Twin Lake Dam alternate, right? And so I think when they said Pipeline alternate that they glitched. They actually mean Twin Lakes Dam alternate. So in other words, I think that there is no, and I'm interpreting here, I'm reading tea leaves, but I think that there's no change in your favorite spot, the Twin Lake Dam alternate crewing area, and that you can still drive out there. And that's great for us because that is, that's where you like to go crew. It's where I like to be crewed from.
Yeah, again, that's one of the questions we do want to ask the race series about what happens to alternate. Alternate, by the way, is in a different county, so that may be one of the reasons why it will not be effective, but we'll have to see on that. The most intriguing part of the story, however, is where the Herald Democrat says the course of the LT 100 run has also been slightly altered. After exiting the Powerline Trail, it says the course will head through the outward bound property before reconnecting with the standard course.
Yeah, and so I had to bring up a map to make sense of this. And I was still confused because what makes this intriguing is that it makes no sense to me, at least. It comes into focus if you assume that they are confusing the run with the mountain bike race here, because runners already use the outward bound area, which is to say this story sort of dovetails with rumors that we've heard that the bike race will be using the outward bound property to get cyclists off the pavement a little bit sooner. The part of the pavement where we've been telling people for 7 years now that they should be working together, that's going to be replaced instead with a shorter, more direct dirt road section. This could make the race a tiny bit shorter in terms of distance, at least, not necessarily in terms of effort. A tiny bit less pavement. So we could wind up thumbnailing it here with a race that is, again, 103 to 104 miles instead of 105.
Again, none of this is confirmed yet. This is just kind of what we have heard combined with what we're kind of reading between the lines in this Herald Democrat story. So please, folks, stay tuned on all of this, but especially these course changes. All right, the second half of the story is nowhere near as controversial. Essentially, it is talking about adding more porta potties and increased enforcement of rules geared toward respecting the town of Leadville and reducing our race footprint.
Yeah, basically, it is helping us not be litter bugs, which I am in favor of. I am also in favor of not having to wait for 20 minutes at the starting line for a toilet. So let's go ahead and wrap up this, underscoring once again that this is all sort of rumor level analysis. Hadi and I are doing. Any, maybe even all of it could be wrong. It's intriguing, but it is definitely not written in stone. So we're looking forward to having Tamara on as soon as Lifetime has finalized their changes.
Hey, we're counting down to April 12th. That is our deadline. The date when orders need to be in for our podcast jerseys and t-shirt.
Yeah, DNA has designed some really nice tops for our podcast listeners. We have 2 jerseys. One has a more rock and roll look. It is black with a print that resembles an audio WAV file, but is actually the course profile out and back. The other is a little bit less in your face, and it features Leadville's surrounding mountains. Both have our podcast logo. The black is in the club cut, which I love, and the pink and blue is the race cut.
The t-shirt, yes, DNA does t-shirts, is also cool with an old school cassette tape on the front and our signature line, highest, hardest mountain bike race on the back. You don't have to buy all 3, although that'd be great. But if you do want to buy something, that order has to be in by April 12th.
Yeah, so one last time, our store is leadville.fm/jersey. And thanks again, DNA Cycling, for handling our custom order.
You know, the stem you choose, that meaning the bike stem, has a lot to do with the bike you own and the position you desire. If you want to be upright and your bike is a trail or enduro bike, then your stem will likely need to be short and have a little or even positive rise to it. If your bike is XC and you'd like to tuck under the wind, then your stem will be longer and tilt down, more than likely.
Yep. The good news is Envy has a stem that matches both of those needs. The Envy Mountain stem maxes out at 65 millimeters in length, has a 0 rise. The Carbon stem goes up to 140 and has a 6-degree drop. Now, 140 is pretty extreme for a mountain bike, but Envy does make it in 80 millimeters, so a little bit shorter there. And if you are like me and you've had a spinal fusion, you can flip the Carbon stem, so it gives you a little bit of rise. Highly recommended if you can no longer really bend your neck.
Right. The point is, when it comes to attaching your bars to your bike, Envy has a stem for the job. Bikes with long front centers, which includes some cross-country bikes, will likely take an Envy mountain stem, and a bike with a more traditional geometry will do well with that Envy Carbon stem. Check out the entire Envy stem lineup, including one we'd say does not belong on your mountain bike, the Road Arrow stem, at Envy, that's ENVE.com.
A big part of a racer's success at the Leadville 100 is not in your legs, it is between your ears. I mean, obviously, you do have to have good legs and lungs, but your mind had better be right as well. So for many of us, the drive and focus to finish comes from the words of race founder Ken Klober, dig deep. You're better than you think you are. You can do more than you think you can. Man, we all know that by heart. They're sayings we've leaned on. We've repeated them. In some cases, I've seen tattoos. So all there to help remind us that we are going to get through this highest, hardest mountain bike race.
And it turns out Ken's catchphrases are more than just cowboy speak. There's real psychology behind what he's saying, and it is stuff worth knowing about and tapping into. To help us find our inner Ken Klober, we have back on the show Dr. Justin Ross, a clinical psychologist in Denver, Colorado, specializing in athlete mental health and performance. Dr. Ross is also an athlete with 6 Boston marathons, including a 2:57, and he has a 9:55 finish at our favorite race, the Leadville Trail 100. Get ready to dig deep with Dr. Justin Ross.
We've got one more thing to discuss, and that's who this race is about. This race is about you. We didn't do all this work, so you can get out there and be a crybaby.
Again, we're welcoming back to the show Dr. Justin Ross. He was with us last Fatty, season 5, episode 8, where we really got into the, kind of the psychology of racing the Leadville Trail 100, because we all know, in addition to being a physical test, this is a mental test as well. So we wanted to have Dr. Ross come back, and what we're going to do really here today, Dr. Ross, is break down a lot of those terms we hear Ken say to us, dig deep and I commit, I won't quit, and, all those things, and get into really what that means, like on a clinical level, and maybe, how we can manipulate that and train that, if you will, to have a great day, to execute a great day on the Leadville course. So first of all, Dr. Russ, thanks again for joining us on the Leadville podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for the invite to be back. It's great to be here, and congrats on season 7. This is incredible.
Yeah, we're still having fun with this thing, so we're forging ahead. We're using our, we're digging deep here on this show as we continue.
Apparently we committed and will not quit.
Right. Hey, so let's dive right into, some of those things that Ken says to us, and maybe you can help explain really what it is, and if it is indeed a thing, and what we can do with it. So first of all, dig deep. Like, that's the one we hear a lot. Dr. Ross, that's just not a saying, is it? That's a real thing, digging deep. Like, that's a real mental thing.
100%. And the beauty of Leadville, and I think what captures and inspires so many people to go out there really at the core is exactly that. This is a test of physical endurance, but also of all your mental faculties, mental strength, tenacity, willpower, guts, grit, and determination. This race has it all. And at the center of it really is your ability to train both your body so that you're physically prepared, but also your mind so that you're mentally prepared to handle a challenge like this. And, when I come into this, I often think that the mental side of sport has long fallen into the category of being a game of marginal gains. And I've always seen it differently. I've always seen the mental side as sitting at the very center of everything that we do, both in and out of sport. It commands and drives our attention and our focus. It is constantly narrating our experience. It's describing what we're experiencing in our bodies. It's got all these appraisals. And sometimes our mind can get in the way. It can tell us that we need to slow down or stop when maybe we have more to give. So harnessing and understanding how our minds work and then learning how to operate and drive that is a critical factor in successful any endurance sport, but especially for something like the Leadville Trail 100.
Tell us what dig deep is. I mean, in my research, what I found was that dig deep is kind of like what you would call willpower and tenacity. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think dig deep. I mean, how is that not a psychological phrase at its very core? And I think that how I hear that has always fallen into the category of tenacity. Tenacity has gained a lot of attention over the past few years and really recently in the performance psychology literature. And, the way it's typically defined is just your ability or your tendency to carry on despite facing difficulty. That is the Leadville Trail 100 in a nutshell. It's full of challenges. It's full of adversity, and your ability to be able to push through that is a critical factor in success.
When I hear dig deep, I guess I think, well, I need a reason to dig at all. Is there I wonder, what is the foundation, or what is the area that you are digging deep into?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of this. The one part is finding your reason why and persisting. But the other part of digging deep is what we call resist skills. So we have this balance of being able to persist, but then we also need to have this ability to resist, leaning into fatigue and leaning into doubt and leaning into those thoughts that tell you can't continue. So digging deep has to have a little formulation of everything. And a big reason you'll hear this time of year, when it's still pretty early season, you'll hear a lot of cliche sayings around find your why and make that clear. This is one of the underlying important factors. We know that if you have a very clear and specific and meaningful reason for participating, when you're confronted with that moment of challenge or confronted with that moment of doubt, you have something to sort of dig deep into that provides a little bit of a spark or a fire for you to keep moving forward.
My inclination is, I think, well, I have a motivation. I want to finish the Leadville 100. Do I need to go deeper than that?
Absolutely. Motivation will get you started, but it's not going to get you to the finish line. And motivation is a great thing for people to want to embark on a challenge. But the truth is, success at Leadville takes 6 months of preparation, 9 months of preparation, sometimes a year or longer of preparation. And you're not always going to be motivated to train. You're going to have lots of days where you're tired, where you're fatigued, where life gets in the way, and maybe you make some excuses. And success requires tenacity and discipline, which is doing the hard thing even when you don't want to. And when you start to look at some of the research around tenacity, that's really what we're talking about here is how can you weaponize and train this ability to do things that are really challenging and difficult, especially in the moments that you don't want to, especially when you're tired and it's cold and it's dark and your bed is comfortable and you have to get out for your long ride in the morning, or when you have to do that last interval or that last hill repeat and you don't want to because you're tired. What do you do in those moments? And we think that they're small, but those moments of how you show up and what you do, whether you take on that challenge or whether you sit it out, they really stack up and they create this sense of what you're going to do when you're faced with a challenge come race day.
So if dig deep is tenacity, what is willpower? Give us an example of willpower.
I think willpower is the statement, I commit, I won't quit, right? And when we get into the idea of willpower can be sort of mantra-based self-talk that you engage in, right? I commit, I won't quit, is a great example of what willpower really is at its heart.
So we've got those two things then kind of defined. Dig deep is tenacity. I commit, I won't quit is willpower, right? So is there a part of the brain that this all comes from? Can we find that somewhere deep under our skulls?
Absolutely. The brain is always involved in all of this. And there's a particular region that's gotten a lot of attention in the past few years. And it's kind of getting a spotlight shown on it right now. And this is it's the anterior mid-cingulate cortex is this big phrase, this small brain region that's getting a lot of attention for being at the hub of all of this. And what researchers are really starting to find is this is sort of a network hub where a lot of different brain region inputs all sort of come together. And these input regions contain things like our perception of our autonomic or our physical sensations, things like breathing, heart rate, what we're feeling in our body, our ability to pay attention, our executive functioning in terms of planning, and really our resource management. This sort of guide around how much we have left to do, and how our resources can match up with that. And what they're starting to put together is this little part of the brain is a really important feature in being able to be tenacious or to continue to pushing, especially when you don't want to. They have all this evidence that shows that this is a region that especially can light up when people continue to do things despite not wanting to because it's challenging or it's hard.
So with anything that is a part of the brain or a part of the body, it seems that there are certain people who are gifted and who are naturally tough, who are naturally tenacious. I feel like if I have a gift, that might be a big chunk of it. Is I am pretty good at keeping going, but not everyone is like that necessarily. But I think, like with most gifts, you can also train yourself up to it. For those who are not necessarily gifted, tenacious havers, I'm sure that's exactly the right technical term. How do we get to that point?
Yeah, it's a really good question, right? Because it boils down to the question around trainability. And I think basically anything on the mental side of performance has the ability to be trained. And for long endurance events such as Leadville, the ability to train tenacity is absolutely critical. So there's a couple ways that we can do this. One, just by nature, you're getting out there and following a training plan, staying committed and staying disciplined is really the foundational skill that matters the most. So we talk about consistency being the most important ingredient for physiological adaptations over time. It's the same thing for mental adaptation. Going out, being consistent, doing your rides, doing the hard thing. That's really important. Part two is how you show up in moments of challenge or adversity or hardship. And this can be broken down into any number of ways. You could think about those hard training sessions that you have, where it may be interval based, or it may be tempo based, or it may be something that really pushes you to have a lot of focus and discipline to stay in a moment where you're uncomfortable. The more that you train yourself to be calm in moments of discomfort, to continue pedaling, to continue pushing, and to not give up, the more you're training this skill. And the third thing, and the evidence is starting to really point to, in order to make this anterior mid-cingulate cortex more enhanced, you really have to do things that you don't want to do. So maintaining the habit of training is a really great place for maintenance of this. But in order to take it to another level, you have to purposely push training this in a meaningful way. So one of the ways that I like to do this, I get a little bit playful with my athletes. I call this fishbowl training. And so what we do at the beginning of really spring and summer is we'll create, depending on the athlete, it always differs a little bit. We'll write down a list of things both on the bike and off the bike that they can think about doing. So like off the bike would be 10 push-ups, put it on a sticky note, throw it in the fishbowl or throw it in a bowl. 20 jumping jacks, put it on a sticky note, throw it in the bowl. And here's the idea. You'll go out and the exercise for the day will be a long ride plus 5 fish bowls. And so what you do before you go out for your long ride, dip into the fishbowl or wherever you keep these things, take 5 of these notes, stick them in your jersey pocket. And when you don't know what they are, they're blind. When you get back, you finish your ride, you're tired, you don't want to do anything other than go and sit down. You pull out a fishbowl note and you say, crap, I got to do 20 jumping jacks. All right, moment of truth. I don't want to do it, but I'm going to force myself. And you're not really doing anything in that moment to increase physiological adaptation per se, but what you're training is you're training your ability to continue to do hard things even though you don't want to, right? It becomes this sort of willpower, this tenacity training exercise that can be really helpful for people.
Good one. Yeah, I like that. The fishbowl exercise, Fatty. That'll be the new one for you this year. You actually don't need it. You have no problem finishing that. But a lot of people are up against it here, right? They're very almost overwhelmed, intimidated by the thought of finishing Leadville, getting through those tough moments. And there's a great exercise that you might want to try to help develop some of that. Now, another thing Ken likes to tell us, and look, it's pretty easy to spout these things when you've lived in Leadville and you have a leathery face and a shotgun and cowboy boots on. You can say all kinds of things to people, but it's tough. But he loves to tell us we all have an inexhaustible wealth of grits, guts, and determination, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, do we? In other words, can we run out of willpower and tenacity in the middle of something very difficult like Leadville?
Yeah. Well, the answer, like all good sort of coaching questions, is maybe, and it depends. And it's really true. I mean, it's really interesting if you look at sort of where the academics stand on this. There's kind of two camps. The one camp is no, there is a cap. And you run out of willpower. And where we think about that psychologically from a performance perspective, we call it self-control. And the other camp is saying like, no, it really is endless. There's this really interesting study that actually Carol Dweck and her team did out at Stanford. And Carol Dweck is most famous for the concepts around mindset. Growth or fixed mindset. But they did this study that looked at willpower and whether or not sort of glucose or sugar helps people, tap into this endless reserve of willpower. And what they found was like glucose didn't matter. What mattered going into it was your belief system on whether or not willpower was endless or fixed. And so what they found was the people who believed that willpower was sort of inexhaustible and something that you just had access to, the sugar didn't help them, right? So they took the sugar and they were just able to keep doing what they were doing, sort of unfazed. But the people who believed that willpower was fixed and that they were running out of it, they got a boost from taking that glucose. So one of the things that I think a lot about with this, and I ask a lot of my athletes that I work with, is what are your beliefs on this? This is a question we can all ask ourselves. What's your starting point? Do you believe that willpower, that self-control is something that can be zapped and something that can, be diminished? Or is this a reserve that you have that's kind of endless? Now, the other wrench I'll throw in this is there's a lot of data that shows that when we're fatigued, and many of us listening have, 9 to 5 jobs, we have families, we have a lot of responsibilities, that cognitive fatigue has a pretty significant impact on our ability to continue, right? We do less reps in the gym. There was that study just published in Bicycling Magazine about that. We tend to tap out a little bit sooner on our endurance rides. And the pathway that we tend to see there is that when we're cognitively fatigued, there's sort of two things that happen. The first thing is we have more negative appraisal just about what we're feeling in our bodies. So we're quicker to not only feel that labored breathing or that high heart rate, but we're going to interpret it as it's way more intense than it normally would be. And in turn, what that does is it zaps our self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is this psychological term that really gets to our belief system and what we think is possible or not. And when we start to pair this, like, I'm feeling really tired, that feels really intense, I don't really think I can do it, we sort of slow down or quit sooner than we might need to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to quickly circle back to the glucose idea, because it makes sense that if you were to start to bonk or run low on blood sugar, not only would it affect your ability to turn over the pedals to do things physical, but also it seems like it should have an effect on you mentally. What do you believe, Dr. Ross, happens there?
I think that pathway is exactly right. The mental side of sport, especially in endurance sports, is always this game of interpreting how we're feeling compared to the demands of what's left. Right. And so when we start to have this sensation of, I'm really tired, I'm feeling like I'm bonking, I don't think I can continue to go, that's different than when you can see the finish line versus when you're just starting to climb Columbine or power line. The interpretation is different. This is really what we talk about, the psychobiological model. And one of those ideas is, how much do I have left, and how much do I have, not only how much do I have left physically out in the world, but how much do I have left internally? And do those two things match up? And so it's this constant game of appraising and judging and trying to do some mental math about that equation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hadi, if you'll remember a couple of episodes ago, that was my, we do the fatties finishing tip, and consistency was the big part of it. That's how you build your tenacity. That's how you build your willpower. I will say that this mental bonking that you're describing is something that I am more likely to have once I've had it. That rocks roll faster downhill, and what if it a rock can be sitting on a hill forever, but it's once it starts to move that it really gathers some speed, right? And that's when I have problems. Is it once I've done badly, once I've had a moment where I feel weak, I'm much more likely to continue to have that feeling. Is so essentially I'm asking you, how do I stop that rock that has started to roll downhill?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that's the power of how our thinking really does work. Once we start to appraise something negatively and it gains speed, we're much more likely to feel that and to see that and to sense that. So the starting point for any performance psychology strategy has to be part one, awareness. How good and how quick can you bring awareness that this is starting, that this is happening in your thoughts? If you can't be aware of it, you can't change it. And a lot of people get caught into this cycle where they didn't even know it was starting. So part one is be aware of that. And in training, you can have plenty of moments where you're starting to notice this. This is something you can think about, again, long rides or hard efforts. What starts to happen and when? Part two then is there are a whole host of cognitive strategies that you can use within yourself to battle back that moment. Some of them are just basic, what are you paying attention to, right? What are you fixated on? Can you just change your visual attention to something out in the world and maintain a focus there, keeping it descriptive rather than funneling into this negative narrative? Part two could be, can you challenge those appraisals, right? This is really where that persist and resist strategy comes into play. Can you resist being that rock that falls down the hill? And can you persist by finding some kind of positive or motivational or instructional self-talk that helps you navigate the challenge at hand?
I've always just called that the acknowledge and dismiss approach. And I mean, I actually have those words for myself. When I am feeling bad, I acknowledge it. And then I dismiss it. I say, hey, demon, you're not the boss of me. And it's like, okay, yeah, I feel bad. You know what? I can do it. I'm going to keep going. Doesn't matter.
I love that. What's so great about that is it's a clear strategy. It's very simple to execute. And it reminds you of the two sides of this coin. There's things you have to resist, and then there's things you have to persist. When you get into the willpower ideas, often what we recommend people do is that you come up with this set of principles for yourself. And the principles are twofold. The first one is, I absolutely will, ... What will you absolutely do? And it's usually an attitude or an effort that you sort of command yourself to. And then the other side of that is, I absolutely will not, right? And that could be, I will absolutely not let you dictate what I do here. I will absolutely not let you come into this space and influence my decisions. And I really recommend all athletes have this set of guidelines for themselves. And sometimes what I'll have people do, before your long effort or your hard effort, say those things out loud as you're clipping in for the day. What are your performance standards that you're guiding yourself to that connect to these ideas of tenacity and willpower? It only takes a second to declare them, but when you do them in advance, when you're 3 hours into a 5-hour ride and you're starting to feel this, it makes it so much easier to be able to snap into those thoughts.
Leadville racers go through a lot of gels on race days, and for good reason. Gels are the fastest, most efficient, most convenient way to get calories into your system. You tear off the top, squeeze that semi-fluid into your mouth, and voila, you are fueled for another 20 or 30 minutes.
But after a while, Fatty, that gooey stuff gets old and you need a break. Enter Chews. Same kind of carb, but more candy-like. A packet of Chews can really mix things up and make all those gels a little more tolerable. And the feed, by the way, has a broad selection of chews broken down into categories. You want the most carbs you can get in a packet of chews? Go for Power Bar Power Gels. They have 48 grams per serving. By the way, the feed also calls Power Gels the most gummy bear-like. Love that. You want organic? Grab some Honey Stinger Chews. Sweet and sour? Try the Scratch Chews. The most popular are Cliff Chews. I like those. I especially like the margarita flavor. Got kind of a salty thing going there.
Oh, I love the extra salt in the margarita flavor. Do not recommend eating those for 7 hours straight.
Don't eat anything for 7 hours straight is the point
It
here.
is okay to mix and match flavors, or at least we say that, right? So I love the Power Gel Cola flavored chews. I don't know if you've ever tried those. They're delicious. They are an actual treat. I will eat them recreationally. When I come in for a feed stop, however, I always like you to have an open packet of Goo Energy chews. By the time I hit Twin Lakes outbound, I've been, it's been nothing but gels since 6th and Harrison, however long it took me. And actually having something to chew is a nice change. So remember, your carbs can come from more than one source. Try some chews to mix things up. The easiest way to get them is to go to thefeed.com/Leadville, search for chews. And if you do buy something, remember to claim your $80 annual credit, register your email, verify your phone number, and then you can spend your first feed credit of $20 right away.
Okay, more on the mind game that is the Leadville Trail 100 with our guest, Dr. Justin Ross. And make sure you get to the end of this one for a nice offer from Dr. Ross. As far as the verbiage you use when you talk to yourself, Dr. Ross, I mean, I love the saying, I commit, I won't quit. But is the better verb, I will do something than won't do something?
Almost always. Yeah, it's sort of like the golf ball analogy on the golf course. A lot of people, there's a water hazard on the right, and I'm going to put my nice ball in the bag, and I'm going to bring out my crappy ball. And inevitably that crappy ball almost ends up in the water. It's the same thing. It's more powerful to focus on what you will do. But for a sport that's so internal, like mountain biking, especially endurance racing, making sure you know what you're not going to do, especially from that attitude and that effort perspective, is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I love the simplicity of the will and will not table, right? I absolutely will do this. I absolutely will finish this race. I absolutely will not stay for more than 1 minute. at any aid station, right? These are the things I will do. These are the things I will not do.
No offense to Ken.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's I commit, I will finish, just doesn't have the same cadence to it, right? The guy knows how to turn a phrase.
Sure does. Hey, Dr. Ross, it stands reason to believe that long days in the saddle will help you with this dig deep, this willpower, this tenacity thing we're trying to tap into. Can we improve it, though, with shorter bouts of exercise?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all going to laugh at this, but if you go back to that paper called The Tenacious Brain that was published a few years ago, they showed that 3 hours of aerobic exercise a week is sort of sufficient to maintain this from a brain structure standpoint. Now, everybody listening is doing much more than that in a given week. So I think that the other way to think about another strategy is it's a resist strategy. And it's something that you can think about doing off the bike. And the resist strategies that really enhance that brain center are just as important as the persist strategy. So one of the ideas is we all have this urge to grab our phones in little moments of boredom, right? I'm stopped at a red light. I'm walking in between meetings. I'm waiting for the dinner to cook. I'm just let me look at my phone real quick, check an email, read this article, check social. Every time you notice that, can you resist that urge and just sit for a moment or a minute in really minor boredom or really minor discomfort? And it sounds like such a silly, simple thing to do. And it's actually tremendously difficult for most people. And again, part of the strategy there is what you're doing is you're resisting this urge to do something that's comfortable and instead choosing a little momentary hardship. Those little sort of micro behaviors really do help build this mental muscle of tenacity.
So you will see on Leadville Saturday people at the side of the trail, off their bikes, possibly sitting on the ground, and the whole dig deep thing has gone out the window. So help us get back on our bikes in those moments. What can we do to regain willpower and tenacity when seemingly it has gotten away from us?
Yeah, well, one of the first strategies is whatever it takes to not sit is your best friend in that moment. And I know it's easy to say this now when we're so far out, but it's one of those things, even now as you're listening to this, we're months away. Can you declare that for yourself? I will not sit. Now, granted, there are reasons for that. Things go sideways, and I get that. I don't want to be dismissive of that. Mechanicals happen, physical things happen, and that is going to be a part of somebody's day, guaranteed. But when it becomes a choice, like I am choosing to do this because I'm uncomfortable, that is your moment before you sit down to really take ownership of your mind and say, I am going to choose. I will walk. I don't care what it takes. I'm moving forward. So I'm a big believer that for a race like this, perpetual movement forward is so important. Even if you're struggling and you're feeling really bad, can you hike a bike? Can you walk? Can you remind yourself of the importance of inching towards the finish line? That's really important. Part of the strategies here, again, come back to remembering your why. Why are you out here in the first place? Why is this important? And then the third set of strategies, again, really around self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is this underlying belief system in what you think you can or cannot do. And we build it every single day in our lives as athletes with the choices that we make. So every single day that you are out there training, can you do something to remind yourself of just how powerful you are and how taking on that last rep when you're tired or climbing that hill even though you don't want to? Can those be these little moments that you tuck away in your back pocket so that when you're really tired on course, you can draw upon them and you can remember this reservoir of strength? What we find for people is that the bigger that bucket of self-efficacy and that bigger that bucket of memories that you can draw upon, it makes it a lot easier to access in those moments when you're full of doubt and uncertainty.
Good tools for sure, but sometimes things go completely sideways, right? Things get pear-shaped on us. And you find yourself, I have stopped. I have admitted defeat, albeit briefly. How do I get from that dark place back to the light?
Yeah, it can be very, very challenging. And sometimes what we have to understand is that is part of what we're signing up for in the first place. is this ability to go out there and to get up to that edge to see what's going to happen. And sometimes we are Icarus and we fly a little bit too close to the sun. And when we get burned, there may be no coming back. So often what I'll recommend is, can you celebrate the ability to go that far into the hole, chasing this goal, and recognizing that maybe you crossed that threshold in a way that has been too much for you. Now, this may sound weird, but there's celebration in doing that, because I think for far too many people, we just play it really safe and we don't ever go and chase big, hairy things like Leadville. So I think we can turn that, and there's a way to celebrate that moment, to say, whoa, look at what I did here. I went so hard or so deep. I went way past where I ever thought I could go. And now this is the experience. And I need to be present with it, and I need to honor it, that this is part of celebrating the challenge of a day like this.
By the way, Dr. Ross, there's a lot of information coming at us as we ride that can send us into a negative area. I'm talking about head units and the data coming off of those. I mean, people can start to get frustrated by what they see. Do you have any advice about how much we're taking in during a hard event? Is less more, or is it okay to take in it all, or is that person by person? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's a really important question, right? I mean, I call it the over-quantified athlete. And we have so many metrics at our disposal at any given moment that it's our relationship with numbers that can be very problematic. Almost every study that looks at psychology or performance is manipulating data for people as they're doing it in the lab, whether that's on a treadmill or a bike computer. And what they're finding is it's this relationship with data that really does either make people slow down when they don't need to, or go farther than they think was ever possible. So I think for something like a true race, where it's sort of you versus you for most of us, or you versus a time that you're chasing, what's the most important thing is your ability to regulate based on how you feel. And data is an important part of that. You know, for me personally, I think heart rate and power and elapsed time and speed are really important as you're seeking goal attainment. But so many people lose sight of being able to pace just based on how you feel. Can you go out there and can you really know, like when we talk about zone 2 training, can you know when you're in that zone without a bike computer telling you? Can you get into this like threshold based effort just based on how you feel in your body? Those are unmatched skills to learn for yourself. And then to be able to have that for race day is really, really important. I can't even tell you how many runners, especially that I've worked with over the years, that have some story, some version of, oh, my watch I forgot my watch in the hotel. My watch didn't work that day. For some reason, it didn't charge. And I didn't have any data. And so I just had to go based on feel. And then the question is, how'd you do? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is like, I PR'd. And well, how did you do that? It's like, well, I just had to do it all based on how I felt. And so I let that guide me. Now, my favorite part of those conversations is always, well, then do you think you might train like this or race like this ever again? And the answer immediately is, oh, hell no. Why would I ever do that? I need this data front and center. So again, we can't lose sight of that human experience and what it's like to move in these ways.
Yeah, we love our numbers. I mean, we really do. Ooh. But it is, I go out of my way to reduce the number of fields on my Garmin so that it is only telling me the things that are truly important for me to know. You know, how far have I gone? How much time has it taken? I look at the data later. But one thing that what Hadi brought up that is super interesting to me, and is one of the, I'm doing these Fatties finishing tips this season, and one that I have not done but have kind of inched close to talking about is that piece of tape you see on most people's top tubes that has their times that they want to hit for the various aid stations. And my tip that I kind of have wanted to say but have not said is rip that thing off. Don't have that. You are either going as best as you can or you are not. And seeing that you are behind is not going to help you get caught up. It basically, if you can answer the question, am I doing my best right now, with a yes, then, whether you are a few seconds or a few minutes behind versus a few minutes ahead almost doesn't matter, because the day will change as you go on. I don't know necessarily if this really ties into the tenacity and willpower that you were describing, but to me it feels like they are very closely related, that your ability to perceive whether you are pushing hard enough is not necessarily tied to whether you crossed an intermediate line in time.
Perception of effort is ultimately what we're talking about for performance psychology and endurance sports. And your ability to perceive that for yourself is critical. And numbers are sometimes helpful, but a lot of times they just get in the way. Because to your point, if you hit a certain mark and you're off, if you're behind, nothing good psychologically comes from that moment for the majority of people. It induces anxiety and stress and panic. And where we really get into the weeds on sports psychology is there's a difference between threat state and challenge state. And when we're operating from threat perception, when we see things as threatening to our goals, we are fueled by anxiety and dread, right? We don't function properly. We don't pay attention the right way. Our thoughts can spiral, and we almost never perform well there. A challenge state is when we appraise something as, this is really hard, but I have the self-efficacy, or I have the skills to match it. And so I'm not where I want to be, but this is still a challenge. I'm enjoying myself and I can keep going. So when we're fueled by challenge and joy and connection, it's a performance enhancer. So again, the call out to everybody listening is we have to be really careful about not only our relationship to data, but how that data moderates our decisions when we're pacing.
And that actually fits very closely to why I have not made that one of the things I'm asking people to do. Is for me, I see that tape, and the times on that tape as, essentially bringing me to that threat state that you're describing. And I haven't told everyone to take that off, because I've talked with my wife about it, and she uses that data as, essentially to facilitate her challenge state. She is looking at that and seeing it as a way to help her hit her objectives and to stay on target. I think very much in terms of, my mind's on, a constant loop of how am I doing and can I do better? And I answer those questions and I push harder or easier depending on the answer. For her, it is all about more of the data that she is seeing and where she stands in relation to objectives that she is clearly set before the race. There's different people work in different ways.
This is where that self-awareness piece is critical ingredient number one. And self-aware athletes and knowing what you need, knowing what helps, what gets you into a challenge state of mind, what gets you in a threat state of mind, and then doing more of the former and not the latter is exactly what this is about.
Hey, why don't we wrap this thing up by each of us picking a favorite Ken saying? Dr. Ross, which one resonates with you the most?
Well, I think all of his sayings are so spot on for a number of reasons, especially in performance psychology. I think, I commit, I won't quit becomes a really action-oriented phrase that is something we can all work to adopt for ourselves. So I'll go with that one.
Are you going to finish? Tell me that. I won't quit. I commit. I won't quit. Would you stand up and say that? So I know you believe me. I commit. I won't quit. I'll see you at the finish line, every one of you.
Fatty, you've been around a long time this race. Which one?
The first thing I think I remember Ken ever saying was, you're better than you think you are, and you can do more than you think you can. I don't know if that is always true in every moment of the day, but day by day, event by event, I've found that is something that can become true.
You've accepted a challenge to ride your mountain bike across the tallest, the toughest, the baddest mountains in the state of Colorado, and you've got to do that in less than 12 hours. You're better than you think you are, and you can do more than you think you can.
Yeah, Dr. Ross, we didn't really define that one. Is that one fall under willpower or tenacity?
There's a couple ways you could break that down. One is, I think it really is sort of a mantra-based performance standard, right? Because it's guiding you towards action. And we also know, like, if you get into the weeds on self-talk, there's a difference in pronoun use and how that impacts performance. So when we're inside our own heads and we can shift to a you-based pronoun, we tend to have longer time to exhaustion. We tend to be able to take on more of a challenge. Now, you don't need to start telling yourself you can do it when the gun blasts at the start of the race. So you need to have this pronoun shift once you get sort of down the stretch, sort of 2/3 it in, really being able internally to sort of talk to yourself in that third person. You can do it. You got this is really, really helpful. So I think there's, there's deep power and wisdom in that statement that he has.
Mm-hmm. And I'll take, we all have an inexhaustible wealth of grits, guts, and determination. I always kind of love that one when he used it in the gym, especially the old gym when we're all tightly packed in there. That one seemed to erase a lot of doubts for anybody who might be sitting there that, yeah, you can do this. You've got it. You can go out and tackle this thing as hard and as high as it may seem. You can do it. So I'll take that one as mine.
It wouldn't be fair if I just told you, you got to go on, you can't quit. I want to tell you how. And then I'm going to tell you why. The how's the easy part. You just don't quit, and there's a reason why you don't have to quit. Inside each and every one of you is an inexhaustible well of grit, guts, and determination. So when you're in that race and you're hurting, you feel real bad, you think you can't go on, you get into that well, you reach down, you dig deep. It's inexhaustible.
All right, Dr. Ross, again, thanks for giving us some definition here, some understanding of what's going on, and some tools to help us all mentally tackle the Leadville Trail 100.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's great to talk about this stuff. And for anybody who's interested, we're going to launch a 3-part webinar series that really dives into the weeds on this. We're doing it in partnership with Boundless Coaching, where I'm coaching some athletes, and Lifetime. When we're breaking this down, we're going to do a series for those chasing Unbound, but then a series for those chasing Leadville. This will be announced here very shortly. But anybody listening that wants to sign up, you can go over to my website, drjustinross.com, or the Boundless website. And for all listeners, we'll give you 20% off. So just type in podcast 20, and that'll get you 20% off that series.
Thanks again, Dr. Justin Ross, for his great advice and for that great offer to our listeners. If you're interested in the seminar he mentioned, either go to drjustinross.com, that's drjustinross.com, or the Boundless Coaching website, which is boundless10200.com. I'm going to do that again because it is complicated to write down. Pull over if you are driving right now and write down boundless10200.com to get signed up. Remember that code podcast20 for a discount on the series. The seminars start on May 28th.
Dr. Justin Ross is the easy one. Common spelling for Ross.com.
Yes.
That's the easy one. Hey, if you like the show, go to wherever you listen and give our Independent Show a 5-star rating and write a review. To see all the ways you can find us, head to leadville.fm. Good luck in your training. Thanks for listening, and we will see you at the starting line.